people are looking for help. When an individual struggles with pornography, they often turn to their church leader for that help. How does a leader help a person overcome the shame of this issue and start seeing positive progress? How can a leader help youth to open up about struggles with pornography? What are some lasting, proven tactics that actually make a difference? In order to help, Leading Saints has created the Liberating Saints Library with more than 20 presentations featuring individuals who have a unique perspective or expertise around this topic. 3 of those most popular sessions are available to watch now. Simply text the word LEAD to 474747 to start watching now, or visit leadingsaints.org/liberating. Leading Saints is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping Latter-day Saints be better prepared to lead. And we do that through various ways, including this very podcast that you're listening to. I hope you subscribe, maybe leave us a review while you're at it, and I think you'll enjoy the content you find on this podcast. And then jump on over to leadingsaints.org, and you'll find thousands of articles dedicated to leadership context as it relates to being a Latter-day Saint. We have virtual summits that we've done. Check us out on social media, and also a weekly newsletter that goes out that has unique content you won't find anywhere else. So jump into the Leading Saints world. We're glad to have you. Today I'm in Provo, Utah, in a church house with Mark Ogletree. How are you, Mark?
Great, Kurt. How are you?
Good. Now, your last name's easy to remember because I'm a big BYU fan, and your son gave me a lot to cheer about for many years, right?
He did. He gave us a lot to cheer about too. We miss watching him.
And he was a walk-on, right? I mean, he wasn't highly recruited per se, but
kind
really
of
had an impact.
It's a kind of a long story, but yeah, he wasn't getting a lot of looks from BYU at the time, and
that's where he wanted to go?
That's where he wanted to go. He was
Nice.
recruited by some other schools, Texas Tech and Air Force and a few others. As soon as a lot of them found out that he wanted to serve a mission, that he was committed to that, they kind of dropped their interest. So
Nice.
He was a last scholarship kind of guy that Bronco gave, and it turned out to be an awesome experience for him and for us.
Nice. And now you're originally from Texas, is that right?
We are.
And you're a convert to the church.
I am.
I mean, we could probably go hours about your story, but give us a synopsis of your conversion.
Yeah, the synopsis was growing up in Texas. On my high school baseball team was one other guy, maybe at that time, maybe the only LDS kid in the high school. And we played high school sports together and became super interested in the church because his family was just outstanding. He was outstanding, and through that process met a few other just outstanding, awesome people. And there were 3 of us that all became interested in the church, and 2 of them joined when they were in high school. Twin brothers joined in high school. My parents wouldn't let me; they were quite opposed to it. A great Southern Baptist family, and so I waited until the summer before I was to start college and was able to join, and then a year later go on a mission. So it just timing-wise worked out perfectly.
Yeah. And now your day job is you're part of the religion faculty at BYU. Is that, at what point did you feel like that's sort of where I want my career to end, or was it, did you meander for a while?
I was definitely a meanderer. In fact, as I was finishing BYU as a student, I was one of those guys that still wasn't quite sure what they wanted to do. And had some options, but anyway, I remember, I'll never forget going through our commencement exercises and watching some of my professors that I really looked up to in that procession, and I just had the thought, I want to come back here and teach one day for sure. So that was always the plan. Went ahead and did a master's degree, another master's degree, and then ended up doing the doctorate. And once I was done with that doctorate, I knew that I wanted to end up back at BYU if I could. So.
Nice. And what are the typical classes that you teach?
So I teach 2 classes. I teach the Living Prophets, which is awesome, super fun. And then I teach, because of my background in marriage and family, teach a class called the Eternal Family, which is now a required class in the religion department. And so every student who comes through BYU needs to take that class. So that's pretty exciting too.
So you see a lot of the student body come through.
We do.
Wow.
We do.
That's awesome. And you're currently serving as a stake president here in Provo. And it's just, I mean, you were a COVID stake president call, right?
Exactly. 1 year ago, in fact, maybe even this week or next week, we were called right in the right in the middle of COVID.
Wow.
For sure.
Wow. And you told me before just a handful of people were in the room when that was announced via Zoom, I assume.
Right. Most of our stake had to turn in via satellite or the broadcast system. And so it took us a while to start meeting members of our stake, but it's been awesome.
And I'm just curious, like over the last year, like how did you get established in this call or find a routine or connect with people? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, we did. In fact, that was such a pressing thought for us, is how are we going to do that, with COVID? And so we did. We started to do some activities. We wanted to show our members that COVID did not mean that the church had to shut down. What we had to do is find ways to work with it and to work around it. And so we just started engaging and planning a lot of activities with our youth. One of the things, Kurt, we decided to do is we wanted ward conferences to last for a month instead of a weekend or a few days. And so that was our way of getting to know each ward, or each unit, I should say, in more of an in-depth way, was to spend an entire month with them, going on visits, meeting with the youth, meeting with other members, being in their homes. And I think that helped us out a lot too.
Nice. So just really getting creative and like a month-long word conference. I mean, that's something that isn't in the handbook per se, but you have the liberty to create. Right.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
Nice.
We don't know if we can keep that pace up for 9 years, a month-long word conference, but it was, for this first year, it was incredible.
Yeah. And how would you describe the demographics of your stake? I mean, pretty typical Provo, Utah County stake?
I would say so. I mean, it's a well-established stake. We've been here for quite a while. A lot of members that live in our stake have lived here for 20 or 30 years, in the same homes. Those members are getting older and some are leaving, and so some younger families are moving in. It's quite eclectic in the sense that, we have a lot of professional people. We have BYU professors. We have educators. We have people that own their businesses. I would say it's quite a successful group of people and very faithful. I mean, they staff the Provo Temple. They work at the MTC. They help out with all these BYU student wards in terms of serving in bishoprics and high council. So it's a lot of great, wonderful, faithful people.
Yeah. And I'm curious just how the logistics of that work, with the so many student wards, why I say student wards. Does the BYU stakes come to you and say, we need 10 guys or, whatever? Is that how it works? Or?
Exactly. There's not necessarily a quota, but I'm a really big believer in it. Even as a bishop, people will get mad at me sometimes because they felt like half of our ward was serving at BYU, but I always felt like that was a blessing to our ward to have people go there and serve in those callings and then come back and be even stronger and have a greater perspective. And so as a stake presidency, we're quite committed to that. And so they come and ask, they'll come and tell us. We work with a couple of stakes, and they will come and tell us, here's what we need. And we always try to find people to get there. And the people who serve in those callings, as you can guess, absolutely love it.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a neighbor on my street who has harassed me for a year because they were there, got released, and he's like, we have to go back. And anyway, so they're back there again. So,
nice. Yeah, and that's interesting because everybody experiences sort of that human resource negotiation, I'd call it, where on a ward, it's usually this passive aggressive battle between the ward and the stake, right? Like, oh, the stake needs a high councilman. Well, don't tell them about brother so-and-so, or,
right.
or we need to get them, make sure we keep them, right? And I remember just as a bishop trying to get in that mentality of saying, whatever you need, we're here to support the stake. If you need somebody, what a blessing that they'll come back and be more trained, right? But this is even maybe an additional dynamic to that, right?
It is. Just once again with the MTC, there's so many different places that people can serve around here, but it's such a blessing too. We came here from Texas, and there just aren't those opportunities at all. We thought it was a rough thing there if the state called one of our people to be a early morning seminary teacher. It was like the end of the world. But here it's not uncommon for a lot of our units to have 30 to 40 people serving outside of their ward.
Yeah. That's awesome. So as we talked about just some different topics we could address, with your background, your professional background and the work you do at BYU and the research you've done and whatnot, we landed on this concept of, understanding and really implementing the role of a bishop or an elders quorum president or whatnot, especially with this recent shift where, there's been more of a emphasis for the bishop to focus on youth, and then hopefully the Relief Society president, the elders quorum president steps up and maybe addresses some of those other responsibilities that that sometimes dominate the time of the bishop, right? And so where do we begin with understanding the role of the bishop and really implementing that in an effective way that the work gets done and there's not one man or one woman that's overwhelmed?
Part of it, I think, Kurt, is, and this is just my opinion, but it's really trying to break through some cultural, what do you want to call that? Just some cultural bans that seem to restrict us in some ways, and traditional things too. I mean, in my entire life as a member of the church, it feels like we've heard the message, getting the elders quorum president involved, turning things over to the elders quorum president.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, so the bishop can be with the youth. I mean, we've only heard that message for so long now, and President Nelson and our first presidency in the Quorum of the 12 are really, in my mind, finding a way to make that happen now by, making it such a consistent message, right, that we hear over and over again. But it's something in my mind that, number one, bishops have to embrace, bishoprics need to embrace. And that's difficult as a bishop, as you know, because you have people knocking on your door constantly. A lot of adults that need help or in a crisis. There's always something to do.
You open that door and there's the lineup, right? You think, wow, what the?
Yeah, exactly. And then, as I was mentioning a little while ago, it's something that we have to train our members to buy into as well. I mean, our members need to get used to going to visit the Relief Society president or the Elders Quorum president and understand. I mean, there's so many levels to this, because it's not only that, but then it's, as leaders, those people, when we put people in those positions now, we have to call an Elders Quorum president that really is a bishop. It's not someone who just manages home teaching and helps with moves anymore, but it's someone that could be the bishop right there on the spot, I think. And so there's a lot of issues, I think, that we need to engage in to make this work and run on all cylinders. Yeah, the members, the leaders, everyone. But I think we're getting there.
Yeah. So talk to me about, as far as like getting the members on board, because I think that's insightful. Because typically, you may see the adjustments to the handbook and maybe hold a leadership meeting, right? Get the leaders in the room and train the leaders, but they may be full aware of what's going on, but it's really a broader training effort of the members. So any suggestions on maybe how to go about getting the members on board?
I love something that Elder Bednar said in a training meeting that I was in a few years ago, and I've always believed it. And it's so funny, but we put so much emphasis on what I'm about to say we probably shouldn't do. But in my mind, every time there's a problem in the church, let's give a talk on it. We need to talk on that, right? The members come in late, we need to talk on that, right? Our youth aren't showing up to mutual, let's give a talk on that. Whatever the issue is, fifth Sunday presentation, whatever, and that's going to solve the problem. And Elder Bednar said, doesn't work. He said the only way that we can make things like this work is we have to be in the homes of the members. We have to be working one-on-one with the members as the Savior would to help change some of these paradigms and help them work through these challenges. And so in our mind, we're trying to do that as a stake presidency and as a high council. And part of it, I don't want to say we're giving talks, because what I'm about to say sounds like, so you're giving talks again, but we have spent probably every training meeting with our priesthood leaders the last year talking about this thing. And this one issue of transitioning this over to the Elders Quorum and Relief Society presidents. It's just been the drum that we have beat consistently. And when we meet in their homes, when we meet in meetings in their wards, over the podium, on ministering visits, it's the message that we're trying to convey.
Yeah. Now, we talked sort of like training the members, but now from the perspective of the bishop, because a lot of times I don't know how to say no to these people lining up. I mean, a lot of them are dealing with really heavy problems that I feel like I need to address. I can't just point them in a different direction, right?
Everyone is so comfortable. Well, I shouldn't say everyone, but many people are become very comfortable with their bishop, and they recognize the bishop has a mantle and they have keys. One of the things we have to do is find a way to elevate an elders quorum president so that they could see those same keys, right, and see that same spiritual mantle that rests with them. I wish I knew what the answer was on how to exactly do that, but. Anyway, I think that's part of the process. Kurt, ask me that one more time. I had a second thought as you said that.
So as far as like with helping the bishops better, delegate or move things off, with this constant focus on making sure that we're not overburdening the bishop.
Because everyone wants to see the bishop, right?
Yeah.
And so, and a part of it for us has been, once again, helping the bishop really embrace their role, with the youth, and helping them really understand you are the young men's president. You are part of the young women's group here. And that really is where you need to spend your time. And so as a bishop had to tell some members, look, we are not turning you away. I mean, I would never want any member to feel that way. Mm-hmm. But we also want them to know of what the focus is, because there's a lot of things that our members come to us with as a bishop that they may not need to. And I know that may sound a little bit harsh to say, but there have been times that I've met with members as a bishop and I've thought, I wonder if I would ever go to a bishop with this. I don't know if I would. So part of that, teaching the concept of spiritual self-sufficiency, or there are certain times that we need to see a bishop and maybe there are times that we don't. We know that, I've thought a lot about this, but, bishops get a lot of phone calls that say things like, hey, now what time is stake conference? Or do you have so-and-so's number? Or, things along that lines. I can remember I've seen bishops making copies of programs for sacrament meeting and picking people up to give them rides to church. And we as members have to find a way to really sustain the bishop in a way that, that he can get to where he needs to be with those youth. But I don't think he's going to turn too many of those adults away, but he may get to a point where he feels really comfortable with someone. I remember meeting as a bishop with a family that just had some financial challenges. And I said, you know what, there is an incredible brother in our ward who's a financial planner who would love to meet with you guys. And he has so many more skills than I do in this area.
Yeah.
And they were happy to meet with him, and he was a blessing to their family. But I think we have to start thinking more that way about it, instead of a bishop thinking I have to absorb everything that comes my direction. Yeah.
And what would you say in terms of the repentance process? Obviously, is the keys the bishop holds. That's a lot of that falls on his plate. And maybe we sort of step out of this specific topic and speak more in general, like as far as the bishop's role, like what they should consider. Because I remember as a bishop, we're 16 weeks into this, and I don't know what else to tell them. I've shared all those scriptures I typically share, and sometimes maybe there's opportunity to delegate at least some of that engagement or support elsewhere. But what are your thoughts as far as that transgression repentance process?
I mean, the bishop is definitely the common judge, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of his a key aspect of his calling. So he can't give that away. But there are things I think that he could do that would help him and the person that he's working with a little bit more. For example, in my world, I think there's some great counselors out there that can really help people. And I recognized as a bishop so quickly, there is no possible way I can meet with 20 members this week, or even 10, and spend an hour with every one of them, because there's 400 other things to do.
Right.
And so I would meet with people initially and get the ball rolling for a little while and get some momentum with them. And then I would feel like, you know what, we can turn you over to this professional counselor that can really help you with that. And if it works the right way, that counselor is calling me every week and giving me a little report. That doesn't happen all the time, as you know. Yeah. There's also other members of the ward that we can, that could help in some ways, especially if it's not, once that transgression's cleared up and they're moved on, but they need some just support and help. I think great bishop counselors can help with some of that. Relief Society sisters, ministering brothers and sisters. They're, outside of the transgression, the members can really support a bishop that way.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else as far as the role of the bishop that we haven't mentioned yet, maybe in the context of serving youth, or because maybe they do create that space, but now they don't know how to fill it with the youth other than just sort of trying to be present at different activities.
I think so many bishops, there are bishops that are very comfortable with the youth. It just comes natural to them. But then we know that there are those who don't feel that comfort at all. It's very challenging for them. But for me, being with the youth was always like therapy. I mean, it was like you're with the adults for a while. You walk into the bishop's office where the priest quorum is that day, and it's like you could just sit down and just relax for a minute and be healed by the youth. But here's what I would say. I think every bishop has been called of God, no question about that in my mind, and has a mantle. And there's a reason they've been called, and they have gifts and talents and abilities that a lot of people don't have. At least the Lord will magnify those. And so I think bishops need to engage for sure. And so in my mind, a bishop should speak to the youth as often as he can. Even if he's not well versed in speaking, the Lord will elevate him, right? And so bishops' youth discussions, I'm surprised sometimes when I talk to bishops and they're like, now what is that, right? And that's an opportunity on a monthly basis to be with the youth and to share what's on his mind, but also to have a discussion with the youth on what's on their mind and connect with them. I wanted to be, as a bishop, involved in the planning of all the activities because I wanted to be able to be there. And I knew if I wasn't in the room and they planned a high adventure or something and I couldn't be there, I didn't ever want that to happen. And so, the Bishop's Youth Council, presidency meetings as a bishop or in a bishopric, we always were there. We wanted to be there for that. Every youth activity on Wednesday night. I remember one time years ago, we had a bishop in a ward that we lived in that just didn't come to Wednesday night activities. And I remember we had an athletic type of activity with our priest quorum that night. And the idea was if they had done this 5-mile run that we would all get ice cream afterwards or whatever. But I remember taking the youth into this ice cream place, and there was our bishop and his family, eating ice cream. But I remember thinking, what he's missed out on one of the most incredible blessings of being with a bishop, and that's connecting with our youth. So any opportunity to be with those youth, I think that's where his influence is going to be the most profound. And I think it's one of the greatest blessings of the call for sure is being with those youth, being energized by them, feeling their strength and their power, preparing them for missions and marriage, and it's a highlight. And so I think for bishops who struggle with that, it's an opportunity to find out how the Lord can elevate them, and because the Lord wants them to do that, and he'll make them equal to that task, even if they feel they don't have gifts and talents in that area. He will elevate them in ways where they'll be able to find some way to connect, and they'll make a difference.
Did you have, thinking back to your time as a bishop, were there any routines or, you have the typical youth interviews that are sort of, you get in that schedule with those, but any other routines or habits or approaches that you did to engage with the youth or connect with them?
One of the great blessings of our life, and I say I count my wife in with this as well, but I was able to be the bishop when our kids were all teenagers. So that was 4.5 years in Texas, and then another 6 years here in Provo. Two different times, but that was the span in our life where our kids were teenagers, and so it was super cool in my mind. We wanted it to be so good because our own kids were in there, so we had some skin in the game, But I would say routines for sure were. We always had a bishop's youth discussion every month. That was a great way to connect. We had an Aaronic Priesthood committee meeting every month and a training meeting with all of our youth leaders. I always believed when I had the youth leaders in a room, and when I say youth leaders, the youth, that it was my opportunity to try to train and teach them. And so a BYC meeting consisted first of some doctrines of the gospel, and let's talk about that and how it applied to them. And always felt like we were training the future leaders of the church when we were with them. But yeah, that high adventures and girls camp, and a lot of things in the summer were just regular things that you could count on. And just time with them in different ways, to go to their games, to go to their performances, to be involved with their families and some of those things. But when there's a kid in your ward on a stage and they look out and there's their bishop and his family and they have no other reason to be there but to watch them, I think that sends a powerful message that we care about you. Yeah.
And I'm curious to dig in as far as like youth discussions, especially with your teaching background. Was it like, what format would you recommend in that, or how did you handle it? Typically maybe you invite them over to the bishop's house and then you pick a topic, or how'd you go about that?
So a couple things. In our Texas ward, we had a lot of youth. It's surprising to say it this way, but we had, probably 3 times the youth in that ward as we had in our ward here in Provo. And because of that, what we would do is we would alternate where we would have that bishop's youth discussion among the bishopric and other leaders of our youth. And the topics were usually driven by things that came to my mind in my interviews with our youth. If I would be in those interviews and think, wow, we really need to address this, or we should certainly talk about this. I remember in that Texas ward, we had a young boy, kind of a sad story, but an awesome family, and their son at the age of 8 died of a brain tumor.
Oh, wow.
So that Bishop's Youth discussion that month was all about, death and why bad things happen to good people and the plan of salvation. And of course, there's interviews where you feel like we really need to talk about some of the church standards and some morality. And in our ward here, we were able to do a lot of our Bishop Youth discussions in our home. And sometimes we would just change it up a little bit. We did it here at the church a few times. We would do it at some of the counselors' houses at different times, and some of the youth leaders as well. But I think we had most of them at our home here. So, and It was, as far as the format goes, and this is something, Kurt, I feel strongly about. But I've mentioned it to you. But we just have to prepare this generation to put the church on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And they need to be the leaders. And so any youth meeting, the youth always conducted. And I would always say, let's not stick a youth up there that has no idea how to conduct a meeting. We don't need that. Let's teach them how to conduct a meeting, and then let's put them in front of everybody. And so we really worked on that. So those youth would conduct that meeting. They would conduct the BYC or the BYD anyway, or both sometimes. And then we always had a message, had some interaction, had some discussion. You always want to make it fun, and spiritual and doctrinal, and then always refreshments after. And it's just a great tradition. Yeah,
that's great. And you sort of alluded to there, but as far as like youth empowerment, and that's interesting to sort of see as through go through this discussion. We empower bishops, and hopefully they're empowering Relief Society presidents and Elders Quorum presidents, and we have to empower members to allow these leaders to be empowered, and then youth need to be empowered, right? This isn't just some youth camp that we're just there to have fun, but there's some empowerment because, like you said, we need to put the church on their shoulders at some point, right? Anything else as far as youth empowerment goes?
So here's a great parenting rule, I think, and that is that a parent should never do anything for their child what that child can do for themselves. And I think the same should apply in our leadership as we train our youth to become leaders. Is that why are we doing things for our youth that they can do? And so we do see too many adult leaders. I've been to several mutuals this summer, Wednesday night activities with our youth. And in so many cases, there's adults that are conducting the youth meeting, and that should be a first assistant in the priest quorum or a girl from her leadership. And anyway, so we need to train them. We need to believe in them, that they can be leaders, and view them as leaders, because they are the future of the church. And in 3 months, in some cases, they're going to be conducting a meeting in the mission field. They may have never learned how to do that. And so I really believe that strongly, that here it is right here, that you have to have participation to have conversion. And if they want to get converted deeply to the gospel, they have to be participants. And so I know in our stake, we've talked about being a little bit worried about our young married couples. Well, too many of our young married couples don't have a lot to do in the church. We're not giving them enough to do. And so, participation leads to conversion. Let's give them something to do, right? And help them buy into that, and put some weight on their shoulders a little bit and let them grow. And so, so we're really big on that idea of let's let our youth lead. But we got to train them how to lead first. And I've been in other places where we want the youth to lead, but they have no idea what they're doing. And so let's train them, and let's teach them, and let's stand beside them, but let's let them run with it.
Yeah. And I love the concept of participation and conversion, because oftentimes we think, well, and we do. I mean, we need to create space to get them in the scriptures and teach them those doctrinal principles, but we sort of just keep pushing them that way. But maybe call a timeout and say, you need to participate here. But in order for you to participate, we got to walk you through a few steps of how this works. And then that participation really works well with the instruction, right? And the classes.
Exactly. A few years, I'm laughing because I'm thinking of an experience a few years ago where I was so big on this principle, right? We're going to have our youth lead, and I was called into a teacher's quorum to be an advisor. And we said, okay, guys, we're going to plan the year out. Here we go. And they came up with basketball for every night of the week, right?
I was probably in that class.
Yeah, every Wednesday night. Yeah, you would have loved it. And that's when we had to reel them in and say, okay, here's the deal, and let's read from the handbook. Here's what the program. This is not a club. This is actually a church, and here there's a program for Wednesday night. So here's what it is. we taught them and trained them on it. Okay, now let's try it again. Let's plan out the year with this knowledge now that you have, So yes,
that's cool. And just making time for that, and because it's easy to sort of jump in and be like, well, let me just quickly do this for you, or this is what good activities look like, and we can't do all basketball, right?
It's kind of like letting your son mow your lawn when he's 6, and there's going to be little patches and strips everywhere. But you let him do it, right? And then when he goes in to get a drink, then you go back and mow it over again. Exactly. But he's got to have that shot at mowing it.
Awesome. Anything else, a principle or concept as far as, this empowerment of different roles, anything we haven't touched on, or maybe we've covered it all at this point?
I think doctrinally we can roll out a little bit with our youth, the significant role that they play in the church, and that I want all the youth in our stake, to know that this church is theirs as much as it's ours, right? Mm-hmm. And that there is a history of some pretty incredible youth in Old Testament history, in our church history, in the Book of Mormon, and to have them connect with those Mormons and Joseph Smiths and Samuels and Davids and to elevate them in a way to let them know that at this young age, you have this capacity, and there's no question that you have it. And we're here to help you understand it and to learn your identity and who you are right now. You don't have to wait until you're in the mission field or once you're home, but right now, you have this great capacity and ability at the age of 14 or 15 to lead a group of 10 people. You can do this. You have it. Anyway, it's just helping them understand that that's true, that others have done it, and you can do it, and we're here to help you do it.
Yeah, and I love that, reflecting on some scriptural examples, or there's also a deep tradition, even I think right now in the, Come Follow Me, we're in Doctrine and Covenants 89-ish, and, Joseph Smith is like 29, 30 years old, and it's like that today, that's such a young kid that's running this church and restoring
a young
the
single
gospel.
adult,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
But he's married.
Yeah. Right, exactly. But and just showing that that empowers them to see those examples of these were young prophets throughout the scriptures or in our modern days that did some remarkable things, and that you can do that too.
Right.
Yeah.
Amen.
So just some random things. I'm always intrigued to ask a stake president as far as like the High Council, for example. I remember being in a stake presidency, and there's this natural thing of like, okay, the handbook says that we're supposed to meet, at these times, and I don't know really what to do with this group. Like go to your wards and do your things. One guy's making sure the keys are, the physical keys are getting around to all the building, the bishoprics and whatnot. So what's your approach like? How would you encourage a brand new stake president to utilize the High Council?
This is really interesting. When we were called, one of the things that I kept, the term that I kept using is workhorses. We need workhorses, right? We need some, and the High Council that we had been incredible and wonderful and some serious mentors in this stake for a long time. But we knew that we needed to get some younger men on the High Council to have some experience so we can start to, really shaping the leadership in some of the wards and stakes. And so the first thing that I feel as a stake president is this is not a place to hide or retire, but to really work. And so we have a High Council of some of the strongest men that I've ever met in my life, and each one is so willing to work and to serve and to help and fully engaged, and so I think here's the analogy that I've always bought into as a bishop is, and it comes from Bronco Mendenhall in his book, Running into the Wind, but he talked about, getting the right people on the bus, but then you got to put the people on the bus in the right seats, And so we really have tried to do that. And number one, I guess if there's an order to things, we have tried to make to quote a member of our stake presidency, President Blake, we've tried to make all of our meetings a revelatory experience. I feel more pressure in our High Council meetings than almost anything I do, because there's this expectation that it's going to be this outpouring of the Spirit, and we're going to receive a lot of direction, which has been incredible to watch happen. And so anyway, I know you're asking a question about how to utilize the High Council, but we take the Lavelle Edwards approach, if it's okay to quote him, but we call the best people we can and get out of their way and let them run with it. We help them understand their duties and responsibilities, and they just rise up to it. And it's been wonderful and incredible to watch. When I interview the bishops and the elders quorum presidents, one of the things I'll ask the bishops is I'll say, tell me how the high counselor in your ward is doing. And in every case, it's just they rave about how these men are blessing their ward, and they attend their meetings. They bring their families and attend meetings. I had one bishop say, yes, this high councilman helped me move. He found out I was moving, and he just came over, and he by himself helped me move anyway. So I'm not really sure, exactly what the formula is, but I know, when the expectation is these men could potentially, be bishops here someday, or be called to serve somewhere outside of our stake to do something that's going to weigh heavy on them. We want to make sure that they're prepared for that, and so we give them a lot of responsibility, and they have just. It's been one of the great miracles I've been able to see as a stake president is watching them. I was on a high council before, and it was a little bit different. There was about 4 people that did all the work, and a lot of people. They had been kind of older in their age, and they worked and they served, but it really rested on 4 or 5 people to kind of carry the load. And in this case, everyone is bought in, and they're converted to the gospel, and they love it, and they're passionate about their callings, and they are making a difference in the wards they serve in.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. I'm curious to know, just especially with your professional work as, in its doctrine and religion department, or what's
Church History and Doctrine
Church
department,
History and Doctrine, right? I'm always intrigued on specific doctrines that maybe leaders should really understand clearly, or maybe focus on a little bit more during that period of time when they're serving in these roles. Any doctrines or scriptural perspectives come to mind?
One of the things you always think of is the atonement, right? Because, it's the enabling power, it's the redeeming power. And, when we talk about power and strength, I mean, that's where it comes from. And so in my mind, any scriptures that teach us about that or the restoration, because these are the things that we should be testifying of. And of all people who should know the gospel is true, it's the leaders of the stake, and the bishops and the women who serve. So those kinds of things, those kind of doctrines, I should say. But also there are doctrinal teachings that help motivate us and inspire us to be committed, And so I think those have been important to me to know. I mean, I've loved so much our church history this year as we've studied it, just seeing the sacrifices that people made as early saints. My wife and I were just on a tour going across the country doing some church history, and it was so incredible to get reconnected, to just see how far people walked to go to a meeting, or Joseph Smith going from, Palmyra to Harmony or Fayette. And so those are important. And then, I would say there's also, I'm so motivated by the conferences, by the general conferences. It's such a time for a leader to have their bucket filled. But some of the teachings are so helpful and motivational. One of the things, Kurt, I've had a great experience with is the ensign, now the Liahona. But as a bishop, every month as I would read that, I always received some kind of inspiration of what our ward needed to do. And then, of course, the conference messages, but even just learning the skills of just listening, just hearing those messages it's incredible. I mean, the Lord will guide us and lead us to those messages that can really inspire. But I'm sure everyone's inspired by different things. I'm reading Elder Oaks's biography right now. That inspires me. I actually finished it today, so I just ordered Heber C. Kimball's life. Just to keep being inspired by these faithful, dedicated people and just all that they did. It's so humbling because I feel like we pale in comparison to the sacrifices they made. But those are the teachings I think that motivate me. And then I guess I would have to say leadership-wise, I'm just always motivated by loving leaders. We've all had experiences in our life, I think, where we've had leaders in our life that maybe weren't so loving. And I know we've made excuses for that sometimes, of, well, that's just how they are, or they were in the Navy, or, whatever we say. But in my mind, the greatest advice I was ever given as a bishop was from another bishop. And I said, what do? I don't even know what to do. And he said, you just represent the Savior to the people that in your ward. That's all you have to do. And I think that to learn Christ-like attributes and those Christ-like traits, that's always a motivation to me to realize that when I'm sitting at a desk with someone in my stake or my ward, that we represent the Savior. And I know that's a humbling thing to think about, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, you mentioned, general conference and filling your bucket with general conference. Any unique approaches you take? Is it mainly just, are you a note taker during it? Do you sit and sort of just absorb what you can or review later? But what works for you? And not that there's like this formula that you figured out, but what works for you?
My kids laugh at me of how serious I take general conference. But first of all, as a bishop and now as a stake president, it is just an incredible weekend, as you know, to be with your family and to be immersed in the gospel. But they'll laugh because I'll have a table set up with a computer and another monitor over here, and we're taking notes. And I finally got a little bit away with that. Now I just have a little lap pad as I'm taking notes. But part of that is I teach a Living Prophets class at BYU, and so I want to be able to walk in Monday morning and be prepared. But, I had a great teacher. When I joined the church, I was living in East Texas at a smaller university for my first year. And this was in 1980, 1 or 2. But when we went to watch General Conference in those days, you went to the branch building, and there was a radio sitting on the podium, and I remember sitting for 3 sessions on Saturday, 2 sessions on Sunday, listening to this radio. And it was embedded in my mind of how my friend took me to be part of that. And I thought, wow, I've never listened to a radio for, this many hours in my life, but it really cemented in my mind how important conference was. And so from that time forward, we just have never missed a session. I think it's the most important thing that we can do in our lives. And so our approach as a family is to watch it together, to watch all the sessions together. This is going to sound really weird to say, but I'm just going to say it because I really believe it.
I love it.
But I've always believed that Saturday is for the saints and Sunday's for the world, and I think there are messages on Saturday that we just have to hear, and so General Conference has been, I would say, one of the most powerful influences on our family, for a long time. And so we continue to love it. And there's great revelation, as there's great revelation that comes to us as a result.
I've never really thought about it, but once you say like Saturday for the saints and Sunday for the world, and it does, I wouldn't be surprised if that was intentional. Maybe it is. I don't know. But
I know
those messages can really be, church focused on Saturday, and then you get to talk about the U.S. Constitution on a Sunday, right? So,
exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Mark, this has been awesome. Any other principle that we haven't hit on before we wrap up here?
One of the things that has formed my leadership style, I would say, is just being around great leaders and having that opportunity. And I had a mission president that was one of the greatest leaders I've ever met in my life, and I would describe him as a man of velvet and steel, and then just having great bishops in our life. And I've always just paid attention, you just pay attention to these great leaders and learn. And not that you think one day I'm going to be a bishop or a stake president. I've never had those, you never want to think that way, but to be surrounded by great leaders. This is a church that develops leaders. And I love something President McKay said years ago, that the real test of any church or religion is the kind of men that it makes. And of course, we could say, and the kind of women that it makes as well. But this church makes incredible leaders, and we learn by watching, we learn by observing, and we see Christ-like leadership all around us, And I would say that I'm really grateful for that. And my experience as a leader has been forged and developed, I would say, by being around some incredible leaders in my life, but also being around some leaders that weren't so incredible. And I know we don't talk about things like that in the church, but we've all experienced it. We know what that's like to be with someone that's not fully engaged or doesn't seem to care as much or is a little rough around the the edges, but sometimes you learn how to be a great leader by watching the mistakes of others too, and we're just observant. But I would say that overall it has been an incredible experience just watching the Christ-like nature of our leaders. And that has been probably one of the highlights of my life, is to watch even our general authorities, our members of the 12 of the First Presidency, how Christ-like and how kind they are. It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue to my final question is, as you've had so many opportunities to serve in leadership roles, how has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
I love that. It's to emulate the Savior in my mind, or in other words, to be the leader that we want to be, all we have to do is look at the Savior and study his life and watch how he interacted with others, watch how he edified. We don't talk enough about the Savior's hope and his optimism. And but I've learned so much from watching him, as we read about his life in the scriptures and as we have others share their testimonies of him. We have been given the most incredible model of leadership. And as we follow him as our leader, then great blessings and power and strength flow into our lives. And so I would answer that question by saying that the more I try to follow the Savior and emulate the things that he would do and how he would lead this stake, the more power I feel, the more strength I feel, the more happiness and hope that I feel as I follow him.
And that concludes this How I Lead interview. I hope you enjoyed it. And I would ask you, could you take a minute and drop this link in an email, on social media, in a text, wherever it makes the most sense, and share it with somebody who could relate to this experience. And this is how we develop as leaders, just hearing what the other guy's doing, trying some things out, testing, adjusting for your area. And that's where great leadership's discovered, right? So we would love to have you share this with somebody in this calling or a related calling, and that would be great. And also, if you know somebody, any type of leader, who would be a fantastic guest on the How I Lead segment, reach out to us. Go to leadingsaints.org/contact. Maybe send this individual an email letting them know that you're going to be suggesting their name for this interview. We'll reach out to them and see if we can line them up. So again, go to leadingsaints.org/contact, and there you can submit all the information and let us know. And maybe they will be on a future How I Lead segment on the Leading Saints podcast. And remember, text the word LEAD to 474747 in order to access the 3 most popular sessions of the Liberating Saints Library.
It came as a result of the position of leadership which was imposed upon us by the God of heaven, who brought forth a restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when the declaration was made concerning the only true and living church upon the face of the earth, we were immediately put in a position of loneliness, the loneliness of leadership, from which we cannot shrink nor run away, and to which we must face up with boldness and courage and ability.